Welcome to Smalltalk Daily for Tuesday, May 18th, 2010. This morning we're going to create a custom session class for our Seaside application and make sure that it's used by two classes, the login UI, which we're going to create, and the root UI, which would be the normal path into the application. So to get started, let's create that new class. We're going to go to the new class dialog here. We're going to call it blog session. We're going to subclass this from seaside.wa session. And let's try to spell that correctly with a capital S. And we'll give it an instance variable of current user. The idea here is that we will have a user cached in the session so that we can check to make sure that the current user is logged in or not. So that's really all we need to do with that session class. Next thing we need to do is to create the new login class. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll create blog login UI. And we'll subclass this from seaside.wa component like the other things we created the other day. And we'll give it an instance variable of user because this is going to be a form class. Now the interesting thing you'll see in this is how forms in Seaside are a little different than what you're used to. So taking a walk through blog login UI, I've created an initialize method where I cache a new user in the user instance variable. And then we take a look at the rendering. So we have render content on. And here's where we have the form. We create a new form with a paragraph here and in strong login to post edit. And we have here embedded in a form a little table to make sure things line up nicely. So we have render username, render password, render buttons. Notice the way I'm factoring this is similar to the way you would factor a regular UI that you would build with, say, a client UI builder. So I have my render username down here. So I have it putting out username and text input username of self user. And that means that that will make sure that when we process the form, this is how we get the username into the username field of the user class. So we have this user object that we've created and we'll cache the username there. Likewise in password, we have the string for the password, and then down here render password, HTML password input on. Here's the variable piece that's going to be stored into of this object. So we'll take the user object, stuff the results into the password, and then the buttons are where things are processed. We have the submit button, and it's going to call back into validate login, and that's going to check whether we have a valid login or not. We haven't created the actual processing logic to check all this yet. We'll do that the next thing that we do tomorrow, but we have that callback here, and then here we'll call the root UI if it's canceled. So if we cancel, we just go on to that. Let's take a look at the validate. So we come in here, and here we have the detect to see if the username and password matches. If it's not, we check user. We just have user nil be nil, and we set the user current in the session to that, and then we call blog root UI. Notice that we're calling blog root UI in any case, and that's because we haven't done the actual posting form yet. When we have the posting form, what we'll do is change this so that if we have a valid user, we'll go ahead and call that form. If we don't have a valid user, we'll just put the display view form up. So that's really how you process stuff in Seaside. Notice the very straightforward nature of this. It works very cleanly. It's a lot simpler than working with servlets and SSPs and all of that kind of stuff. Only thing we have to do now is we have to make sure that we're using this session. So far we haven't done anything with the session, and we have to go to some configuration code to do that. Now before we configure, I had to execute this to go ahead and register my login application as an application. The next thing I have to do to configure things is go to Seaside, open browser on server, and we'll bring this into the view. And notice here I have my login in my view, but I also have this configure. So let's go there, and it asks me which entry point do I want to configure. Well, I'm going to want to configure both of these. Let's start with login, and we'll come in here. It's a fairly long screen. What I want to do is scroll down, and you'll find here under General we have this session class, seaside.wa session. Let me move this into the view completely, and if I scroll this over, you'll see what I have is an override button here. So what I'm going to do is press the override button, scroll down again. You notice it changed this from just a plain text field to an input box, and I can change this to the two available sessions I have. Let's change it to blog session, hit save, and now I want to do exactly the same thing to blog view. So I would scroll down, scroll this over a bit, change this here, change this to blog session, hit save, and now I've gone ahead and changed both of these guys so that they use my custom session. That's what I have to do to use a custom session. There are a bunch of other configuration options on the screen that I'm not going to go over right now, but there are a bunch of things you can look into. This is how you set up a custom session though. In any case, now that I've done this, if I were to change that callback logic that I showed you a few minutes ago, and I had my posting form ready to go, I could have it such that when a user logged in, if it was a valid login, they go to the post form or the admin form, whatever you put there. If it's not a valid login, they just go to the view form and they don't get that option at all. So that's about it for today. Until next time, have fun with Smalltalk.